We're going to segue right into the next panel. I also will assure you, even though we're a little late, we're actually more or less on time. We will adjourn precisely at 1 after Senator Klobuchar's keynote speech. So what we've heard today, and by the way, I just want to clarify, hopefully not a misconception I said when I was talking about manufacturing and then innovation or knowledge-based work. You know, in our view, it's critical to have both. The U.S. is just too big an economy to build our economy all on thinking. We have to have thinking, we have to have making, and as a couple people said, they go together. So we're going to segue now into discussion about how do we do all this? Obviously, the biggest challenge, I think, in Washington is a political challenge. It's not really figuring out what to do. We've written about that. A lot of other think tanks, companies, there are a lot of ideas, a lot of reports. We know what to do. The question is, why aren't we doing it? And to get at that, we're going to have a pretty interesting discussion with two former members of Congress, and I want to introduce John Cranford, who will be moderating the session. John is now the managing editor for enterprise reporting at CQ, Congressional Quarterly. John has a long and distinguished background in economics reporting, both for economics and government fiscal and monetary policy. He started at CQ in 1984, served as CQ's economics editor for 3 years before becoming senior economics writer, covered a wide variety of issues, banking, security, other issues. He's the author of a book, Budgeting for America, a book on U.S. federal budget policy, which I think probably now is going to be reissued and be a bestseller given the budget problems of today. In 1996, he left CQ for 6 years to go to be senior economics editor at Bloomberg News, and returned to CQ in 2003, where he currently serves as managing editor for enterprise reporting and writes a weekly column called Political Economy, which if you don't read John's column every week, it's really excellent, and it gives you a good insight into what's going on in the political economy of Washington. So if John can come up.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Cranford. As Rob just said, I'm from CQ.
There's Vernon.
Oh, here comes Mr. Ehlers right now. I'll vamp for a few minutes while he gets himself mic'd up. I write a little bit about economic matters and politics, and I try to organize CQ's coverage along those lines as best I can. Joining me here on my left, on your right, is Baron Hill, one of the two former lawmakers we have with us this morning. Mr. Hill knows something about how hard it is to triangulate in a divisive political environment, and how hard it is to hold on to his seat, which he recently lost in the last election, but I gather he's gainfully employed again, so we should all be thankful for that.
Life's good.
Vernon Ehlers will be joining us in a minute. He just retired after 18 years in the House, former nuclear physicist, has some insights into innovation and the challenges of research development and federal role in all of that. Both of these gentlemen served on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, which has had several names since I first started covering it in 1975. They, I'm sure, have lots of observations from personal experience, so when Vern gets himself budget cuts, we're on an austerity kick, obviously, suddenly from stimulus to austerity in a whipsaw. Is there, assuming that this Congress is going to cut federal spending, and assuming there's a question about spending on research development, science education, and the kinds of things that we typically think of as promoting innovation. Is there too little in the right places, too much in the wrong places? Do either of you have concerns that this austerity push is going to do serious damage?
Just a comment. I don't think the Congress has any choice but to reduce spending. The attitude of the nation is to reduce spending. And a lot of members of the current Congress were elected on the promise that they would help cut spending. I think the problem is more is deeper than that. It's not just that the public wants to cut spending. Neither the public nor a substantial portion of the Congress recognize what is required for innovation. You mentioned NIST, NSF, Department of Energy, you can add a lot of government agencies. The example I always give when giving talks to the public, it's about something they understand because they've seen it and they've seen how it works. But Charlie Towns, who happens to be a good friend of mine, he is at Berkeley now where I did my graduate work and taught for a while. He's a great guy, wonderful person. But he had the idea for the laser. He first developed the maser, by the way, most of you don't realize that. That's microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. That worked so well, he went on to the optical level. So it's light amplification, stimulated emission of radiation. That's the laser acronym. I would guess, I don't know for sure, I should give him a call and check, but I would guess he probably didn't get much more than $100,000 from the federal government to do his research on that. At most, it would be a couple $100,000. He developed a laser. Well, that was a cute thing. Every physicist was thrilled by it because we could amplify light. You know, everyone knows how to amplify sound. We're bombarded with it daily. But to amplify light, in other words, you put one photon of certain frequency in, and you get two photons of the same frequency out the other end, and exactly the same frequency. That's a remarkable physical phenomenon. But what happened with it? Today, your sewer is leveled with laser radiation. The ceilings in, not this room, but many rooms, and in your own house was probably with a laser spinning around, telling everyone what the level was, so the ceiling is absolutely level, it's flat. Multiple uses of lasers, surgery, and removal of tattoos of all things, a booming industry. You know, a lot of young people today are going to spend lots of money in the future getting their tattoos off. That's all came out of lasers. That's not what Charlie Towns was trying to build. That's not what he was trying to start. But today, lasers are a multi-billion-dollar industry. You'd be astounded at how big that is. All for investment of a couple $100,000 from the federal government. No one else would put money in it. Hardly any business could imagine any use of it. Hardly any business would put any money into doing it on their own.
And when was that?
Oh, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary.
So 50 years ago, finding $100,000 for a project like that probably didn't raise anybody's eyebrows in Washington, right?
No, although that was a lot of money back then, but nevertheless, it was accepted. He was a very bright physicist, hardworking.
But today, $100,000 for a project at NIST gets close scrutiny on Capitol Hill and sometimes gets hammered, right?
That's right.
So are we pennywise and pound foolish?
Yes, I think we are.
Obvious question.
But the public doesn't understand that.
No, they don't. That's the problem. It's not a sexy issue, but it's so vitally important for economic growth and development. You know, Dr. Ehlers gave his example. You know, our breakthroughs in quantum mechanics created the iPod. And who would have known that that would have happened? But it did. And so it's important that we make these investments. But when we talk about cuts, the cuts that Congress is now talking about is not going to solve our deficit problem. It's just not going to do it. And we've got to all grow up and be adults and recognize the problem. And entitlements are the problem. You've got to address the whole issue of entitlements. We have to talk about Social Security. We have to talk about Medicare and Medicaid. And we have to make the tough decisions politically in order to save those programs and make our budget sound. And until we do that and act like adults, probably the problem is going to continue as it relates to the present budget situation.
I think the Congress, and since the Congress is a reflection of the public, it's due to the public as well, very slow to grasp onto new trends. When you look, for example, over 100 years ago, a good share of the federal budget went to agriculture. Agriculture was a major industry in this country, and I'm talking about in the 1880s. And no one saw anything wrong with helping agriculture. It was a big sector of the economy. And then corporations formed. Ford started building automobiles, and that started a whole new trend. And it wasn't too long before, because of automation, because of equipment, there were fewer people needed on the farms, and those people moved into corporations, factories, to make things. And the Congress never really caught up with that. Out of curiosity, a few years ago, when I was trying to get some money for corporate purposes for research, and I compared the budget of the Department of Agriculture and what went to the farmers to what we give industry or corporations to do research through the R&D tax credit, for example. And we've never stopped funding agriculture, even though today it's fairly well off. And we are very reluctant to put money into new entities, such as corporations.
Well, that was one of the biggest problems with the Competes Act, was enhancing that sort of domestic support for research, right?
Right.
We apparently have some questions from the audience or from those watching on the web. If somebody would post those on the monitor here, we'll... okay, specifically, what should the private sector be doing to get government working to proactively support an innovation agenda that can help restore our competitiveness? Go ahead.
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, since we're not hearing from our constituents, we need to hear from the industry, business. And so it's important for you and whatever business that you have, communicate to your member of Congress how important it is for us to be investing into innovation. I think that's the short answer to that question.
And I'm not willing to put all the blame on the Congress. I will put a lot of it on industry and corporations too. They tend to be slow at putting money into new ideas, new projects, just as the Congress is. And they do not do a good job of lobbying the Congress. I'm not sure they even really have their heart in lobbying the Congress on this, because they intrinsically feel that they should be doing it, and yet they don't have the money to do it.
But it's pretty evident that most of the money from corporations is going into development rather than basic or even applied research. So
yes.
The opportunities to see those innovations down the road seem to be limited.
Yes, basic research, most corporations, unless they're really large, for example, Bell Labs under AT&T was a major research laboratory for a long time. IBM was a major research laboratory, but their life depended on continuing to do research because it's that type of corporation. But I didn't have them coming around very often and saying, hey, you got to put more money into basic research.
Baron, the next questioner says that you mentioned that innovation and competitiveness aren't sexy issues. Do you think that in the next election they'll be even more so or less so, or what would it take to make it a campaign issue? Or is there anything to make it a campaign?
I've got some ideas, but I can't articulate them here to make them sexy. But you know, probably not, just to be honest with you. I don't think it's going to be an issue in the next election.
Well, isn't it possible that in the next couple of years, the whole question of America's preeminence in the world will become enough of a concern that maybe those of you who care about government's role in innovation might play a role in?
Well, that's the downside that happens after you haven't acted. But this issue requires leadership on both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans, and the
White House, right?
And the White House, of course. And unless that leadership comes forward and makes this a priority, it won't happen. As I said earlier, I think you've got two members on this panel who we're not partisan in this whole debate on innovation. And Dr. Ehlers, more so than I, led the charge to make sure that things happened that were good for investment into innovation. And now it is coming from the White House. So I do see some leadership here, though the net result as it relates to this new Congress is we're not getting very far right now.
Well, I would say, first of all, one thing I will credit President Obama with, even though he's from the opposite party, he did a great job of picking good scientists for his, not his cabinet so much, but for the Office of Science and Technology Policy, for the director of the Department of Energy, a Nobel Prize winning physicist. He's providing good leadership. So in that sense, we're doing pretty well in supporting the national labs. We're not supporting the National Science Foundation and some others. NIST is not funded the way it should be. But I think to answer your question more directly, what does it take? What's going to happen in the next election? It could become a major issue if one of the candidates, particularly Republicans, since they're on the outs at the moment in the White House, and do what John F. Kennedy did. He talked about the missile gap. That was a big factor in him getting elected.
To raise it as a security question is more than a...
This is partly a security issue, but if you have an articulate spokesperson who's willing to say, hey, the future of our country, the future of our industry, the future of jobs in America depends on how much money we're willing to put into research and innovation, that the public would understand that. The problem is now, the only ones talking about innovation are a few of us in the Congress and a few in the business community. Right. And that doesn't reach the average citizen. But when you have a presidential campaign, you catch the ears of everyone. And when you talk about jobs as being a result of innovation, which it is, and make the case, the public will get interested.
I think Dr. Ehlers is right about that it can become an issue. I probably misspoke when I said that it probably wouldn't, but he's right. John Kennedy did it with a story. He created a story. And I was reading with interest in the Washington Post an article about innovation here just last week where you had to tell a compelling story in order for this issue to become surface to the top as a major issue. Right.
Got to get the public's attention. We have a few minutes left. Any questions in the audience? Because I have a couple more if no one else out there does. One thing I wanted to address was the whole question of STEM education. Everyone's talking about it's the hot topic and the whole question of how we bring along a new generation of scientists. But the debate seems to also be on the question of should the United States be focusing science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education on everybody, or should those limited resources be focused only on those kids who are obviously going to benefit the most? STEM for all, STEM for those most to benefit. Any thoughts?
Well, I will start out because I devoted a good share of my life to that. And I'm convinced it should be for everyone. What happened to me, I was teaching at Berkeley in my alma mater, Calvin College, a wonderful four-year liberal arts institution, Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they asked me several times to come and help develop a good physics department. And I said no. I mean, who would want to leave Berkeley, the #1 university in physics in the world? But after a few years, my conscience started bothering me, so I went to teach at Calvin. Then I asked myself, what can I do as a scientist at a small college like this? What can I do that will help develop a better understanding of math and science? In other words, get rid of scientific illiteracy, which was the popular term for a long time. And I decided the best thing I could do would be to start a special course for future elementary school teachers about science and how to teach science. Because I had worked with elementary and secondary schools before. I did not meet any teachers who thought math and science were unimportant. But I also met very few who felt they were qualified to do an adequate job of teaching math and science because they didn't really understand it themselves. And so I set up, I got an NSF grant to do summer institutes for teachers. They loved it. And then I got involved with helping schools. I tried to educate my students to do a good job teaching math and science when they get out. I admit I was only one person in the United States, although a gentleman who taught at Amherst College did the same thing simultaneously. It's had a positive effect. I still meet teachers who were in my classes and say, boy, I'm sure glad you taught me that. And I meet their students who are today learning something about math and science. You have to shake up the American mind on that issue because they think we're the best. And since we had the best business, the best corporations, the best manufacturing, the greatest number of Nobel Prizes, we must be doing it right. The point is, we should be getting more Nobel Prizes, and we should be supporting more research. So just because we're pretty good doesn't mean we shouldn't be excellent. Other countries are striving for excellence, and that's something we have to wake up to and have to take care of. And it's not just producing scientists, but for example, if a student doesn't get an adequate education in math and science in elementary school, they're not likely to take extra courses in high school when they get there. They'll take the minimum requirements. And then when they will go to college or a university and they'll be asked, what would you like to major in? I've heard about engineering. I think I'd like to be an engineer. So they meet with someone from the engineering department and breaks the bad news that it's going to take them 6 years because they first have to make up all the math and science they didn't learn in high school, which is a real drawback. And so what's a student going to choose? 6 years to become an engineer, which they don't know much about, or 4 years to get out and become an attorney or a businessman and make more money? Well, they're not going to go into engineering. And so it reaches all the way down to preschool and first grade if you're really hoping to improve the quality of math science education in this country.
Thank you, Vernon. Vernon, you got anything to add to that?
I think Dr. Ehlers said it very well.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Rob Atkinson, back to the stage.
Thank you.